Silas Blackwood was polishing his best boots when the war drums started echoing through Serpent's Ravine. He froze, the leather cloth still in his hand, as the rhythmic pounding bounced off the canyon walls like thunder that wouldn't stop. Today was supposed to be the day Eleanor finally arrived from St. Joseph. He'd been alone on this ranch for 4 years, carving out a life in the most isolated valley in Montana Territory. The nearest neighbor was 20 miles away, and that's exactly how he liked it, until now. The drums meant only one thing: the Cheyenne war party that had been raiding settlements 60 miles south was moving north, and they were close, too close. Silas stepped onto his porch, his weathered hands gripping the wooden railing. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across his property, but something felt different, wrong. The cattle weren't grazing peacefully anymore. They were bunched together near the barn, nervous and agitated. Even his dog, Duke, was whining softly, his ears flat against his head. He grabbed his father's old spyglass from inside the cabin and climbed onto the roof. What he saw through the lens made his blood run cold. Dark figures were moving along the ridgeline, at least a score that he could count. But these weren't scouts or a small raiding party. As he adjusted the focus, more shapes appeared, and more they were positioned at every exit point of the valley. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't a raid. They weren't passing through. 500 warriors, maybe more, had completely surrounded Serpent's Ravine. They'd turned his sanctuary into a trap. Silas's throat went dry as he thought about Eleanor. Her stagecoach was supposed to arrive before sunset, taking the main trail that led directly through what was now enemy territory. She had no idea what she was riding into, no idea that the man she'd agreed to marry's sight unseen had just become the most dangerous person to be around in all of Montana Territory. He climbed down from the roof, his mind racing. The smart thing would be to grab his horse and try to escape through the narrow creek bed on the eastern side. Maybe he could slip past them in the growing darkness, but that would mean abandoning Eleanor to whatever fate awaited her when her stagecoach rolled into this valley of death. The war drums grew louder, more insistent. They weren't just announcing their presence anymore. They were communicating, coordinating. Whatever they had planned, it was about to begin. But what Silas didn't know was that the leader of this war party had been watching him for weeks, waiting for exactly this moment. And the arrival of his bride was no coincidence. Silas loaded his Winchester with shaking hands, counting his ammunition, 53 rounds against 500 warriors. The math was simple and terrifying. He'd heard stories about what happened to isolated settlers who got caught by war parties this size. None of those stories ended well. He thought about Eleanor's last letter, still folded in his shirt pocket. She'd written about her excitement to finally meet him, about the new dress she'd bought for their wedding, about starting fresh in the Montana Territory where nobody knew her past. She trusted him to protect her, to give her the life she'd dreamed of. Now he might get her killed just by existing. The war drums stopped. The sudden silence was somehow worse than the pounding. Silas's ears strained for any sound, but even the wind seemed to have died down. His cattle had gone completely still, like they were holding their breath. This was the calm before something terrible happened. Then he heard it, hoofbeats, not the thundering charge he expected, but the steady clip-clop of a single horse approaching from the south trail. His heart hammered against his ribs as he realized what that meant. Someone was riding straight into the trap, unaware of the warriors, positioned along every ridge. Through his spyglass, he spotted the rider, a young Cheyenne brave. But something was wrong. The warrior's hands were raised, and he carried a white cloth tied to a long stick, a flag of truce. The horse moved slowly, deliberately, like the rider wanted to be seen from a distance. Silas's mind raced. In 4 years of living in this valley, he never had direct contact with any tribal war parties. He'd heard they sometimes took prisoners for negotiation, but this felt different, more personal. The brave was heading straight for his cabin, like he knew exactly where to find him. The rider stopped 50 yards from the porch, well within rifle range, but far enough to show he wasn't looking for an immediate fight. He was young, maybe 20, with intricate war paint covering half his face. But what caught Silas's attention were the man's eyes. They weren't filled with the rage he expected. They looked almost satisfied, like everything was going according to plan. The brave called out in heavily accented English, "Silas Blackwood, we need to talk." The fact that this stranger knew his name sent ice through his veins. Silas stepped onto his porch, rifle ready but not yet aimed. Talk about what? The warrior's lips curved into what might have been a smile. About the woman you're waiting for. About why we're really here. He paused, letting that sink in. About the choice you're going to have to make when her stagecoach arrives in 3 hours. But what the brave said next would shatter everything. Silas thought he knew about this day. The brave's words hit Silas like a physical blow. Your bride isn't coming here by accident, Blackwood. She's coming because someone told her exactly when and where to find you. Silas's grip tightened on his rifle. What are you talking about? Eleanor and I have been writing letters for months. She chose to come here. The warrior shook his head slowly. Letters can be written by anyone. The woman you think you know doesn't exist. He reached into a leather pouch and pulled out a folded paper. This is the real Eleanor Vance. She died of fever in St. Joseph 4 weeks ago. The blood drained from Silas's face. The brave tossed the paper onto the ground between them. Even from a distance, Silas could see it was an official death certificate. The woman he'd been planning to marry, the woman who'd written him such beautiful letters about their future together, was already buried in a Kansas cemetery. Then who's coming on that stagecoach? Silas's voice was barely a whisper. Someone who needs you to believe she's Eleanor Vance. Someone worth 500 warriors. The brave's eyes gleamed with something that looked almost like pity. Someone you've met before, though you don't remember her. Silas's mind reeled. Nothing made sense. Why would anyone go through such an elaborate deception? Who could possibly be worth surrounding an entire valley with a war party? He thought back through his past, trying to remember any woman who might have a reason to trick him this way. You're lying, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Too many pieces were falling into place. The letters had always seemed perfect to understanding. Eleanor had never asked for specific details about his property, never questioned why he'd chosen such an isolated location. She'd accepted everything without the curiosity a real woman would have shown. The brave continued. 4 years ago, you were a different man. You lived in a different place. You did things that left marks on people's lives. He gestured toward the ridgelines where the other warriors waited. She hired us to make sure you can't run when she arrives. She wants to look you in the eye when she tells you who she really is. Silas's legs felt weak. There had been a time before this valley, before he tried to become a simple rancher. A time when he'd worn a badge and made enemies. A time when his decisions had consequences that followed people to their graves. He'd thought that life was buried, that for years of isolation had been enough penance. The sound of distant wheels broke through his thoughts. A stagecoach was coming up the southern trail, just visible through the canyon's mouth. The woman inside believed she was about to meet her future husband, but she was really coming to deliver a justice that was for years overdue. But the identity of the woman on that stagecoach would destroy everything Silas thought he knew about his past. The stagecoach rolled closer, and Silas could hear the driver talking to his horses, unaware that he was delivering his passenger into the center of a carefully planned trap. The brave watched Silas's face carefully, like he was studying every emotion that crossed it. "You still don't remember, do you?" the warrior said. "Sheriff Blackwood of Crimson Gulch, the man who put innocent people in the ground because he was too proud to admit he was wrong." The words hit Silas like bullets. Sheriff Blackwood, a name he tried to bury along with the badge he'd thrown into a river 4 years ago. Memories came flooding back. The raid on the trading post, the family caught in the crossfire, the little girl who'd screamed as the bullets flew. He'd been so sure he was chasing the right men, so convinced he was bringing justice to the frontier. But he'd been wrong, dead wrong. The Vance family, Silas whispered, the full horror finally hitting him. Eleanor Vance wasn't coming to marry me. She was already dead, because of me. The brave nodded grimly. Her sister Clara survived that day, barely. She spent 3 years planning this moment, learning everything about you, tracking you down. When you disappeared, he gestured toward the approaching stagecoach. She wrote those letters. She became Eleanor in every way that mattered, just to get close enough. Silas's hands trembled as he lowered his rifle. Clara Vance. He remembered her now. A 13-year-old girl hiding behind an overturned wagon while her family bled out in the dirt. He'd been too focused on chasing the outlaws to notice that his posse, wild shooting, had hit innocent people. By the time he realized his mistake, 3 members of the Vance family were dead, including little Eleanor. The stagecoach was only a few hundred yards away now. Through his spyglass, Silas could see a woman's silhouette in the window. Clara Vance, now grown up and coming to collect a debt that had been for years in the making. "What does she want?" Silas asked, though he already knew the answer. "Justice, the kind you never gave her family." The brave's voice was cold, but not without respect. "She could have just hired us to kill you. Would have been simpler. But she wanted you to know why you were dying. Wanted you to remember their faces when the end came." The sound of wheels on gravel grew louder. The driver was starting to slow down, seeing the cabin ahead. In minutes, Clara Vance would step out of that stagecoach and face the man who destroyed her childhood in a hail of misdirected bullets. Silas thought about running. His horse was saddled and ready in the barn. But 500 warriors surrounded the valley, and more importantly, he knew he deserved whatever Clara had planned for him. He'd spent 4 years trying to forget what happened at Crimson Gulch. But the dead don't stay buried when the living refuse to let them rest. The stagecoach came to a stop in front of his cabin. The driver tipped his hat and called out cheerfully, "Delivery for Mr. Blackwood. Got your bride here safe and sound." But what happened when Clara Vance stepped out of that stagecoach would prove that some wounds never heal, and some debts can only be paid in blood. The stagecoach door opened, and a woman stepped down onto the dusty ground. She was nothing like Silas had imagined Eleanor Vance would be. This woman was tall and lean, with dark hair pulled back severely and eyes that held the cold fire of someone who'd lived with pain for too long. She wore a simple traveling dress, but there was something in the way she moved that reminded him of a predator circling its prey. Clara Vance looked exactly like her father. The resemblance was so strong it made Silas's chest tight with guilt. Same strong jawline, same piercing blue eyes, same way of standing that suggested she wouldn't back down from anything or anyone. The stagecoach driver climbed down to unload her trunk, chattering cheerfully about the beautiful weather and the lovely scenery. He had no idea he'd just delivered a woman to her family's killer, or that 500 warriors were watching his every move from the surrounding ridges. Clara paid the driver and sent him on his way with a smile that never reached her eyes. She waited until the stagecoach disappeared around the bend before she turned to face Silas directly. The transformation was immediate and chilling. The pleasant mask she'd worn for the driver's benefit melted away, replaced by 4 years of carefully nurtured hatred. "Hello, Sheriff Blackwood," she said, her voice steady and calm. "Or do you prefer Silas now? I suppose men like you change names as easily as you change towns." Silas set his rifle down against the porch railing. There was no point in pretending anymore. "Clara, you've grown up. It's amazing what surviving a massacre will do to a person." She walked closer, each step deliberate and measured. "I was 13 years old when you rode into our trading post with your posse, guns blazing, chasing shadows and calling it justice. The brave, who delivered the message, standing bare, remained mounted, watching the confrontation with the patience of someone who knew exactly how this would end." Behind him, Silas could see more warriors moving into position along the canyon walls. Not threatening, just present, making sure he understood that running wasn't an option. Clara stopped 10 feet away from the porch. "I spent 3 years tracking you down after you disappeared from Crimson Gulch. 3 years learning how to write like a lonely woman desperate for love. 3 years perfecting Eleanor's voice so you'd believe every word." "Why?" Silas asked, though he knew it was a stupid question. "Why not just have them kill me? Why go through all this?" Clara's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Because a bullet would have been too easy, too quick. I wanted you to hope first, to believe you'd found happiness, to think you'd escaped what you did to my family." Her eyes glittered with unshed tears that had been held back for 4 years. "I wanted you to feel what we felt when your bullets found us, instead of the outlaws you were really after." Clara reached into her traveling bag and pulled out a small wooden box. Silas recognized it immediately. It had belonged to her father, Thomas Vance. The old man had carved it himself and kept his most precious possessions inside. Seeing it now, in Clara's hands, made Silas's stomach turn with fresh guilt. "Do you remember what you said to me that day?" Clara asked, her voice barely controlled. "After the shooting stopped and you realized what your posse had done." Silas closed his eyes, the memory hitting him like a physical blow. "I said I was sorry, that it was an accident, that we were chasing dangerous men and ... and that these things happen on the frontier," Clara finished. "That my family was in the wrong place at the wrong time. That I should be grateful you caught the real outlaws before they could hurt anyone else." She opened the wooden box, and Silas could see something glinting inside. Not a weapon, but something worse. Evidence. "Except you never caught the real outlaws, did you, Sheriff? You gave up the chase after what happened to us. Decided the case was too messy, too complicated, too much paperwork." Standing bare-shifted in his saddle, his eyes moving between Clara and Silas like he was watching a carefully choreographed performance. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about something bigger. Clara pulled a folded document from the box. "I found them, Silas. The men you were really chasing that day. It took me 4 years, but I found them." She unfolded the paper, revealing wanted posters and sworn statements. "They're still alive, still robbing, still killing, because you were too ashamed of your mistake to finish what you started." The words hit Silas harder than any bullet could have. In his guilt and horror over the Vance family's deaths, he'd abandoned his badge and fled into the wilderness. He told himself it was penance, that he was removing himself from a job he was too dangerous to perform. But the truth was simpler and more cowardly. He'd run away from his responsibilities. "The Dalton gang has killed 16 more people since Crimson Gulch," Clara continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. 16 people who would still be alive if you'd done your job instead of running away to play cowboy in this valley. Silas felt the weight of those deaths settling on his shoulders. Bad enough that he'd killed innocent people through his recklessness, but knowing that his cowardice had led to more deaths, more families destroyed, made him feel like he was drowning in guilt. Clara held up another document. "This is a territorial warrant for the Dalton gang. Still active, still valid." She looked at him with cold determination. "You're going to help me finish what you started 4 years ago. You're going to help me hunt them down. And if I refuse?" Silas asked, though he already knew the answer. Clara gestured toward the warriors, positioned around the canyon. "Then my friends here will make sure you never leave this valley. But your death won't bring back my family, and it won't stop the Dalton gang from killing more innocent people." She stepped closer, her eyes burning with purpose. "I want justice, Silas. Real justice, not just revenge." The brave spoke for the first time since Clara's arrival. "The choice is yours, former sheriff. Die here as a coward, or live long enough to maybe earn some small redemption." But what Clara revealed next about the Dalton gang's latest target would force Silas to make the hardest decision of his life. Clara pulled out a final document from the wooden box, and Silas could see her hands trembling slightly for the first time since she'd arrived. "The Dalton gang isn't just killing random travelers anymore, Silas. They've gotten organized, smarter." She handed him a telegram dated just 5 days ago. "They're planning to hit the children's train next week." Blood went cold as he read the telegram. Every month, a special train carried orphan children from overcrowded eastern cities to new families in the Western Territories. 53 children, ages 6 to 15, would be on that train. Defenseless kids looking for new homes and new hope. "The train stops in Silver Creek to take on water," Clara continued. "Isolated station, no law enforcement for 50 miles in any direction. The gang knows the train carries a strong box with adoption fees and family payments. They don't care that children will be caught in the crossfire." The brave nodded grimly. "We've been tracking the Dalton gang for weeks. They have 40 men now, well armed and desperate. They've been planning this raid for months." Silas felt sick. More innocent children, just like Clara had been 4 years ago. More families destroyed because he'd been too much of a coward to finish what he'd started. The pattern was clear. His failures kept multiplying, creating more victims, more pain. "Why come to me?" Silas asked. "You could take this information to the territorial marshal, the cavalry, anyone with real authority." Clara's laugh was bitter. "I tried. They said the intelligence was unreliable because it came from tribal sources. They won't act on the word of Cheyenne warriors, even when children's lives are at stake." She gestured toward the brave, standing. "Bear's people have been watching the gang, gathering evidence, trying to prevent this massacre. but white authorities won't listen to them. Standing Bear spoke up. Our children have been taken on trains like this, stolen from their families and sent to boarding schools. We know what it means when children are torn from those who love them. His voice carried deep pain. We will not let more children die because grown men are too proud to work together. Silas realized the full scope of what Clara had planned. This wasn't just about revenge for her family's deaths. She'd forged an alliance between her quest for justice and the Cheyenne's desire to protect innocent children. She'd turned his guilt into a weapon that could save lives. The train reaches Silver Creek in 5 days, Clara said. We can get there in 4 if we push hard. You know the Dalton gang's methods better than anyone. You know how they think, how they operate. She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. You can't bring back my family, Silas, but you can save those children. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the valley. Silas looked at his cabin, his cattle, the simple life he'd built to escape his past. All of it suddenly seemed meaningless compared to 53 children who would die if he chose comfort over courage. But the decision he was about to make would determine whether he died as the coward who ran from Crimson Gulch, or as the man who finally found the strength to face his failures. Silas walked into his cabin and emerged moments later, carrying his sheriff's badge. He'd kept it hidden in an old coffee tin, unable to throw it away completely, despite his shame. The metal felt cold and heavy in his palm, weighted with all the mistakes he'd made and all the chances he'd missed to make things right. I'll help you, he said, pinning the badge to his shirt. Not because I deserve redemption, but because those children deserve to live. Clara nodded, and for the first time since she'd arrived, something that might have been respect flickered in her eyes. This won't make us even, Silas. Nothing can bring back my family. I know, he replied, but maybe we can stop another family from going through what you did. Standing Bear dismounted and approached them both. My warriors will ride with us. The Dalton gang has stolen from our people, killed our young men, taken our horses. This debt goes both ways. Within an hour, they were ready to leave. Silas had gathered his weapons, supplies, and his best horse. Clara had changed into practical riding clothes and armed herself with a rifle that looked well used and carefully maintained. The warriors emerged from their positions around the valley, a disciplined force united by their shared desire to protect innocent lives. As they rode out of Serpent's Ravine together, Silas realized that Clara's plan had been perfect from the beginning. She hadn't just wanted to kill him. She'd wanted to force him to become the man he should have been 4 years ago. The man who finished what he started. The man who protected the innocent instead of running from his failures. The alliance was strange and fragile. A disgraced former sheriff, a young woman consumed by the need for justice, and a Cheyenne war party united in their determination to save children they'd never met. But it was also powerful. They had skills the Dalton gang wouldn't expect, knowledge they couldn't anticipate, and motivation that ran deeper than simple greed. The ride to Silver Creek would take them through dangerous territory, past other settlements that might not welcome the sight of armed Cheyenne warriors. But Silas found himself oddly hopeful for the first time in 4 years. Not because he believed he could earn forgiveness and mistakes were too big for that, but because he finally had the chance to use his guilt for something productive. Clara rode beside him in silence for the first few miles, then spoke quietly. My father always said that good men weren't the ones who never made mistakes. They were the ones who found the courage to fix their mistakes, no matter how much it cost them. Silas nodded, understanding that this was as close to forgiveness as he would ever get from her. It would have to be enough. 5 days later, when the children's train pulled into Silver Creek Station, it would find not just the Dalton gang waiting in ambush, but also a force of determined protectors ready to ensure that this time the innocent would not pay the price for evil men's greed. The man who had once been too cowardly to face his failures was finally ready to become the sheriff he should have been all